Good afternoon, everyone. We are starting with our next CXO panel discussion. The topic is application security opportunities and challenges in a DevOps world. Moderator is Mr. Abhay Bhargav. He's the CTO at V45. Our esteemed panelists include Pravesh Sharma. He's a Senior Manager, Information Security and Technology Risk with the Fidelity Worldwide Investment India. We have Mr. Ajay Bongirwar. He's a Regional Head India and relates for Checkmarks. And we have Mr. Arun Jadhav. He's a VP of Engineering at HackerRank. And we have Mr. Adam Leonard. He's a Managing Director at Walmart Labs. I'm handing over to Abhay. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see all of you attending. Very happy to be here in Nalcon. This is my first Nalcon. The motivation for this topic, obviously, security in DevOps is something that a lot of you have heard of. It's been discussed extensively in several security and non-security channels. Let me give you a quick introduction of what I do and then get into my motivation in this particular space. So I'm the CTO of an application security company called V45. We've been around for the last 7 years. And I do a lot of training. I've authored a few books, and I've been in application security for a while. Over the last 2 years, I have also been extensively engaged and been working on the field of automating application security and security in DevOps. That's been a big passion of mine. I'm a Python programmer. I may not be a very good programmer, but I do a lot of application security automation in Python. Right. So the motivation for this talk really comes from multiple sources. The first time I kind of came across this problem was that we had a client when we were doing a lot of penetration testing, and somehow this client would never ever get ahead of security issues, right? Because you do penetration testing, they would fix it. You do penetration testing 1 quarter later, you would find a whole bunch of other issues. You do it 1 quarter later, you find another bunch of security issues. So they said that, what is the point? We are never getting ahead of this problem. Why not? And then we realized that these guys are doing, 3 deploys a day, 5 deploys a day. By the time the penetration testing is even done, their application has changed multiple times. Completely different. And their developers are introducing new security vulnerabilities and features all the time. So this kind of, prompted at least my work in this particular space. And of course, I can see that a lot of you are enthusiasts in this particular space. So in my opinion, just to start as an introductory note, we've been saying this in security all along, right? We've been saying that security has to be part of your development or DevOps practices. Luckily, I think with all of this buzz, there has been a move towards shifting left, where we are trying, may not be very successful in many cases, but we're definitely trying to integrate security into agile and DevOps processes. So with that, let me just kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation. Obviously, I have with us a very esteemed panel of speakers today. They're from different industries, different walks of life, in different roles. So I'm very interested, and I'm sure all of you are very interested to hear what they have to say about this, especially with their own unique opinions around this particular area. So the way that I would like to do this is that we would start off with, obviously, with an introductory note, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves quickly, and then we can get into different areas of discussion. We would kind of do a 45-minute session around this with their opinions, and then I would open up the stage the last 15 minutes for questions from all of you. Obviously, I'm sure all of you have a lot of thoughts and questions and clarifications around this, so that would be great to get into. So we've kind of agreed upon this, and I've spoken to some of them. So let's start with the introductions quickly. So,
hey, my name is Arun Kumar Jadhav. I lead the engineering team at HackerRank. So I don't come exactly from DevOps world, but I have grown from being an engineer who introduced the security bugs now to a place where I'm having to deal with them on a regular basis. So my interest in this is primarily because fortunately for me, I have had to deal with, or rather interact with DevOps on a fairly regular manner because I got a chance to do a bunch of security compliance, security testing, and then fix them over a period of time in my career. So I interact very, very regularly and in a very productive manner with the DevOps at every stage of software development lifecycle. So that's where I come from.
Awesome. So I'm Adam Leonard. I'm the center lead for the at Walmart Labs team in Bangalore. Been in India, living in Bangalore for 8 months, but with Walmart for 15 years. Started out as an e-commerce developer, and now I do, unfortunately, more administrative than I do technical. But DevOps to us, when you look at it from a corporate and a big corporate environment, is just about driving speed. And everybody knows if you're going to compete today, you've got to move very, very quickly. So that's why we're very interested across the enterprise on DevOps.
Pravesh Sharma. I heads the information security group in India, in Fidelity. And we have been trying to implement DevOps since a year or so, with some success. So I'm aware of how the landscape looks like and what are the challenges ahead for this area. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ajay Bongirwar. I head Checkmarks for India, SAARC and Middle East. Checkmarks is an application security company, and we have been supporting customers, helping them implement AppSec in all kinds of environments, including DevOps. So I have been interacting with customers around this since last 3 years. So I'll be happy to share information around it.
Thank you. As you can see, our panelists have a rich set of experiences from different industry verticals and domains. So my first question is to all of you, and I think we'll take it one by one. The question is rather generic. What does security in DevOps mean to you? The reason I'm asking this is because each of you are dealing with different set of problems. You have different scale. Some of you are part of rapid release products. So what does security in DevOps mean to you, and what do you think that your company is doing about it?
Right. So for us, when in my previous stint, so security sort of originated from DevOps environment, or rather DevOps team, because we had to do compliance. We had to get PCI compliance for our company, which is non-trivial. And none of the engineers, none of the product developers, no one knew what it actually meant and then how to go about doing it. So it started out all with DevOps saying that, okay, hey, this is a PCI compliance. We need to do a bunch of things. This is how we go about doing it. And fortunately for us, and embarrassingly for engineers, it unlocked a whole bunch of vulnerabilities right from the way we were logging the data, right from the way we were transmitting unnecessary data, which turned out to be sensitive. And it, to put it mildly, opened a can of worms, right? Literally. So in a good way, DevOps has consistently been a champion of security for us wherever I have dealt with them. And this is where it sort of originated, put the seeds in, right? So even though over a period of time, engineers and then product managers also started appreciating the role of app security, vulnerability assessment, hardening of kernels and so on, it originated with DevOps for us. So that's where, as I said, we interact fairly often with DevOps, and then they are the champions, and then they are the ones who drive it, and then also they get the things done eventually, because for DevOps, they work. If you look at the DevOps, they touch upon almost every aspect of your tech stack, be it OS, be it deployments, be it they look at the code, they look at the deployments, they look at your logs, how do the log parsing happens, where do the logs go. They interact with every single third-party service providers, be it a SaaS provider, be it some other provider, right? So DevOps, if you look at it, is a hub of a wheel that holds everything together in a way, right? So it's very natural for us that, natural coincidence for us that security originated from DevOps, and disseminating it to, and then inculcating the culture everywhere else became that much easier, because they would interact with just about every stakeholder in the game, right? So.
Thank you, Arun. Please.
Awesome. So DevOps is just a response to a different way of working, right? And it's going from the old waterfall mentality that was pervasive into an agile CI/CD type world. And so It's a way that you can either embed security teams and resources into apps teams or vice versa, or just self-contained. How do you do the same way of working in a DevOps model just for security application development? It's actually a huge advantage, not just from a speed perspective, but if you look at it from an app developer side, problems with security forever have just been that they're further down the road by the time they heard back from what vulnerabilities were. And so when they heard that, security got a bad name because they had already finished and moved on. DevOps lets us take that and put it straight in front of the developer real time. So you're going and your ability to check in code and use DevOps to automate things allows us to, right in front of that developer, real time, tell them not only what test cases didn't pass, but what security vulnerabilities they have while they're still inside that code and thinking about it.
So when I look at DevSecOps or putting security into DevOps, I think it's very clear. It's very clearly. I think you should be able to understand that it means two things. The first thing is that it's putting security into the hands of Dev and Ops group. And secondly is that you should be able to transfer security decisions, which is more around security governance, to the right people within the Dev and Ops, So if I have to say to you that you are making yourself redundant in a certain way, I think you should be ready to do that. I think DevSecOps is more about that you are handling over your security assessments, including your security decision in the hand of Dev and Ops team, right? This is, I think, clearly the most important aspect because it's not about purchase of a certain product or a technology. This is more about, it's also about automation. It's also about collaboration because if you may end up integrating really well into a CI/CD pipeline, but if you're not really collaborated well, you're introducing defects within the CI/CD pipeline. You're not decreasing the defects. The ultimate aim should be, as one of the panelists has said, that it is all about security moving to the left, which is around that you should be able to reduce security defects from entering the pipeline, right? That should be the end goal. Okay.
Thank you.
Being a product company per se, although we help customers implement security in the DevOps, I would say for a customer or for an organization to implement security in DevOps, it's a big change in mindset from the initial state of doing manual penetration testing or just doing dynamic testing. It's a big change in mindset that is required, a big change in thought process that is required, and you should be ready to have that change management done to be able to successfully implement DevOps. If you don't have that change in mindset, you cannot really do that. It's an important aspect, very important aspect to know here.
Right. So the things I heard from this, and thank you all of you for that. There were four major themes I heard. Obviously, one is around automation, the pipeline itself. How do you shift left itself? One is obviously it's a mindset, right? Obviously, when you're talking about DevOps, you're talking about mindset, collaboration, so on and so forth. We're also talking, I think also one point that Arun brought up was around the stack. And this is another area that I'm going to kind of segue into. So what I've seen, and a lot of you in the product space here might have also seen, that application stacks have gotten much more complex, right? You have very, very specialized components, queuing systems, caching systems, which were not there 3 to 5 years before. It's kind of become common in the modern application stack. You have many more complex, components, specialized components. Some of them are insecure by default, right? So I'm not going to name products, but definitely you can see many of you have dealt with such products will know that they're insecure by default. So what is your opinion on the changing role of the stack, especially from a perspective of DevOps? Because this is going to be a very, very key player moving forward in your own application development cycle.
Yeah, so he brought up very good point saying that a lot of those components and third-party SaaS products, they are insecure by default, right? So which is a good way to look at while you are designing the system. And then I think this is where DevOps plays a really key role, which is right when you are conceptualizing your design architecture of the system, DevOps, you should start intervening or rather interacting with DevOps at very, very early stage and then saying that, okay, hey, this is how my architecture is going to look like. And then these are 5 SaaS products I'm going to use. This is a log monitoring system I'm going to use. This is a log parsing library I'm going to use, and so on and so forth. This is when I think they will start asking questions such as, okay, now what exactly is the kind of data that you're passing to this SaaS provider? It's for a developer, they are being lazy as they are. They don't think too much about the data packet. What is there in the data packet I'm enqueuing, right? So if you take even a simple queuing service, for instance, right? So for an engineer, they don't bother about what is I'm going to enqueue, how I'm going to dequeue and all. All they bother about is it going to give me low latency? Is it going to be high throughput? Is it going to be highly available? Like these are 3 or 4 things that typically, and then how easy is it for me to integrate with? So that's when DevOps should start intervening, saying that, hey, you are passing 4 parameters, and then out of which 3 seem unnecessary, right? You can get it from somewhere else, be it database, be it cache, and so on. Why are you trying to enqueue it? So this way, if you start modeling your threat modeling your entire application at this level, saying that, you know, a component or a service should have a data only on a need-to-know basis or need-to-act upon basis. If I use a queuing system further, you don't have to place your entire kitchen sink in a queue. You can enqueue only your key to the, let's say, the datagram, and then the dequeuing system can use the key and then figure out where the data is, how to get it from, right? So you need to start thinking about data-oriented architecture, which is where security will play security will become that much easier if you start thinking about those lines, because now you will know, you know, and then by default you don't trust your third-party service products, SaaS models, and so on. So give the data only that is absolutely necessary, and then also start classifying your data. We'll talk more about it, but I'll leave it at that.
So first, there's never been a better time to be in security, because this makes it a whole lot of fun, right? You don't get bored. In some ways, when you look at like a CI pipeline, some things have gotten easier, right? It used to be these big, huge monolithic programs on their own unique environment, so everything was kind of tailor-made to them. In a DevOps world, when you're moving to that CI/CD pipeline, things are in smaller chunks, right? And so you're biting off different components in smaller chunks, and you're able to scan those and look at them, pen test them all independently of each other at a much, much faster rate. So I think in a lot of ways that stack has simplified some things, or at least gotten us to where we could be a little bit better. There is clearly some issues, because there are intentional things out there that aren't secure, so that it brings a new set of challenges. So don't get me wrong by saying everything is easier today, but it's just a different way of looking at the problem.
Right, thank you.
I think according to one of the stats that I've read, you know, the 80% of any application is third-party components or libraries, etc. You know, and that means that only 20% of the components or the code is being written by developers. You know, even if you can secure securely, that does not mean that your application is secure, because your end-to-end stack is not secure. So I think it boils down to the bigger question around your organization should have better policies around how to vet the different frameworks that you're going to use. So vetting of frameworks both by the architecture as well as the security team is very important, so that only the vetted frameworks can be used. Secondly, what I've observed is that even the vetted frameworks are being used, but the developers don't know how to configure it correctly or how to use them. So I think one of the aspects clearly the security teams needs to enforce very hard is that what is the best mechanism, what is the best way to use a framework or a component, because you may be using everything correctly, but it's not configured correctly, right?
As a product company, in last 3 to 5 years, we have seen requirements from customers changing dramatically. Meaning, 3 years ago, the requirements were just to have the scan happening in the pipeline. You know, when you have the CI pipeline, the scan should get complete. The myth was we should put as least scans as possible, you know, and not have too many scans in a day. But today it's an entirely different scenario. The requirements are I want this to happen. I want, as even Pravesh mentioned, I want the scans for the open source elements to happen along with it. And product companies like us are adopting to those changes. We are trying to give more and more activities around it. The control was required. Earlier, only the scan was required. Now what is required is the control. We should be able, the requirement is we should be able to control the build. If the security is not there in the product, meaning you don't want an insecure build to be released. So now today we have products in which, maybe even check marks for that matter. So if let's say the security of high risk issues or the high risk issues count is more than 0, break the build. You don't want that kind of a build to get released. So that's is available today in products.
Right. Thank you. So before we move on to the rest of the section, I would like to open up the floor for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions? So that, yes.
What are the major challenges you have faced so far in DevOps? Yeah, what are the major challenges you have faced so far for security in DevOps?
Okay, so one is engineers, the developers, typically they want to work on a feature as soon as they can and then move on to the next things, right? So as in a traditional model, what's been happening is usually you have unit testing, integration testing, user acceptance testing, and then security testing. Now it's been introduced. It is generally towards the end of your, once you're done with everything, okay, right now there is something called security testing, let's figure out a way to do it. If that starts throwing up bugs or issues, now a developer who has checked in the code and then move on to different things in life, now he has to pull him back and then, hey dude, here is something you worked on maybe 3 weeks ago, and then, all right.
Great speech. Fantastic. Electrifying.
Right. So now we have to, okay, so now we have to pull back the developer and then remind him, hey, this is what you worked on 3 weeks ago, you have to go and fix it. Right.
Don't go to sleep tonight. Just
So context switching, to put it in a smaller manner, has been a huge pain for us to move us faster, right? So this is one of the biggest challenges that I faced even as a developer, and then I continue to face it even today when I'm trying to, try to release the software as fast as we can.
Yeah, I think it's around the risk assessment. So typically you go back and look at the older model of doing risk assessments, and it's, once every couple of years, when you get to a DevOps type of model, how do you do that when you're releasing code every day to production or multiple times a day? And so you have to completely rethink that risk assessment and even a threat assessment on that as well. And how do you change your processes, or how do you get rid of it altogether, or how do you make sure that you have some expertise in the security area that knows what business is doing, what the application developers are doing. It's a complicated problem to solve. I haven't seen anybody do it great. Most people just try to iterate on those risk assessments more often,
Right.
But it's certainly a big gap when you switch models.
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, some of these challenges have been pretty, well known. And let's kind of switch gears a little bit towards another area of security in DevOps, which is obviously on everybody's mind, which is automation, right? Now, automation is great. Automation is happening with DAST, with SAST, with a lot of things. IAST, for instance, RASP. You have so many technology paradigms when it comes to automation. A lot of times automation could include running Selenium scripts to, Selenium scripts or other type of scripts to test any security regression, so on and so forth. And all of this is typically considered automation. My personal opinion around automation is that while automation is great, it gives you a great deal of value, do we automate everything? Or is there something that we can't automate? Let's ask our panelists. So let's start. What is your opinion on automation? What kind of security automation have you seen, and what do you wish to see? It's something that I would like to know from all of you.
Sure. So since there's been a lot of talk about shifting left of the security testing and so on, I'd like to see shifting of right as well happening, as given as important as possible. So one area of automation that I don't see happening, hasn't happened, and then I would like to see happen is, how do you detect anomaly in an automated fashion, and then how do you do it as efficiently as possible without being a huge, bringing huge inefficiency to the entire tech stack. To give you a very concrete example, there was a case where we had got PCI assessment done and everything was done. And right on the day the auditors they were actually conducting the PCI audit. That day, fortunately, because one developer was looking at the logs, he realized that we were printing the card digits in a plain text on the log files, right? So clearly, none of the policies, none of the compliance, it has slipped through everything. Now, how do you automate this kind of anomaly detection, right? So this would require usually multifaceted approach. You have to have static code analysis, you have to have the CI/CD, some test there, and then even at the end of it, on an ongoing basis, if there is an unusual pattern that has come up in a log, how do you surface it? And then how do you detect it in the first place, right? So this kind of evolving and then continuous security testing and then security assessment is what I would like to see happen. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened, and so there is I think, big room for products and services to be grown there.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, so when, as I said earlier, that DevSecOps is all about able to transfer security decisions, which means that the developers and operations team should be able to take security decisions, which itself is a big challenge. Looking at currently, they don't understand a lot of security aspects. So if they look at a lot of false positives in the product coming out, then they will be very reactive towards it. So I think the first thing is reducing the number of false positives that's coming out in the product. I think that will take its own time in terms of how the products will evolve over a period of time. There are a lot of good products coming in with a less number of false positives. I think another thing which you need to keep the focus on is in terms of training the developers correctly, because don't think that just pushing the things through a CI/CD pipeline would make your DevSecOps program successful. It's just a part of it. But if your DevSecOps continues to throw a lot of issues at the developers, they won't be very happy about it. So you need to push them. You push this program really hard, so they really learn and how to reduce the security defects from entering the pipeline. That should be your key goal. So I think it should be outcome-based program rather than just integration of tools and technology and some awareness program. If you continue to see high number of defects in the pipeline, I think that's not a very successful program.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I can only say two things. You cannot automate two things. One thing you cannot automate is fixing. Finally, developers will have to fix it, okay? And it might sometimes take maybe one build or two build more by the time they really fix it. So that is one consideration you need to have. Second is, as Pravesh mentioned, the false positives. So false positive is something that needs to be removed before you put it into the DevOps pipeline. If you do that, if you are able to build a program around first doing the scanning of the application, removing the false positives, then putting it into DevOps pipeline, you will have a much more successful implementation.
Sure. And I think another thing which you need to be careful is that don't just throw tools at them, because if you throw more new tools at them, I think those developers will be resistant to change. So I think you ought to give them tool which they are currently using, or you give them an interface which they're currently using, so that they don't, so this program is successful. If you continue to show them that, okay, this is a new interface that you created, which will give you security findings, I think, and give a new layer of interfaces, I think they won't be really happy about it.
Right.
So I'd just say technology is still a people business, right? And people write code that are doing the automation. And so unless you want to put your whole faith in something somebody did who knows how long ago, you're not going to be successful automating everything. It's meant to make things easier so we can focus our time on looking at other things or doing other work, right? And so you have to be really thoughtful about how you prioritize that. You're not going to want the same level of automation potentially for an app that helps go book meeting rooms in the office, but you may for a point of sale type system. And then where do you have the thought leadership and the actual people power? going and doing other types of testing and other looking in logs and other things that you're just not going to get out of an automated test suite.
So just one thing I would like to point out is while automation is good and helps overall, it will also lead you to a sort of false sense of security, because it can get your developers and then everyone else to think that, okay, right, there is something called automation that's taking care. I don't have to worry too much about it. So as the recent cloud outage showed, so it is while we have automation, you need to have periodic manual and then human intervention to conduct periodic audits, periodic assessments, and take a checkpoints as to make sure that things are working as the way they are.
One great points, especially one of the things that I found from this entire discussion is that, I mean, things that we've been talking about in DevSecOps as well, which is around developers, right? Now, developers naturally are already busy people. They're already doing a lot of stuff. So if you ask them to take on security as well, there is a lot of pushback. In many organizations, there is a lot of pushback. So one of the things that I believe makes a lot of sense with security in DevOps is to speak the developer's language, in the sense that make sure that they understand, or not just more than understand, try and use processes that they use. So instead of PDF reports, if you can give them Jira tickets, something as small as that could help you speak the developer's language in fixing security issues. So my thoughts are, I mean, my question to the panel next is, what have you done, or what would you like to see with speaking the developer's language when it comes to security, especially with DevOps?
Right. So I brought it up earlier as well. So which is don't use, or rather talk about security as one more thing to be done right at the end of the thing of a design or software development lifecycle. So security has to be merged into right at the beginning of the software development lifecycle, whichever way you are following it. So start brainstorming and start questioning about right from the time they are architecting the system. Okay, what are your data? How is the data flow going to look like? Now, this credit card number, even though we are encrypting it and so on and so forth, is it necessary for you to hand it over to some other third-party service provider and so on? So you need to talk to them in terms of at the time of design and architecting the system. You need to talk about them. Okay, right. So you make it a part of when it comes to coding, they already know that they have to do this. Currently what happens is they're in the middle of feature development. After that, someone comes and tells them that, hey, there's one more thing you need to do, take care of this security issue as well. This is what sort of deters the developers and then distracts them from moving ahead.
Right.
Yeah, I think your great developers that you work with want more empowerment, want to do things themselves. And so certainly I agree with you completely. You got to get involved early. But if you give them the tools to give them the real-time feedback, we haven't seen a lot of pushback from that. And where you do see it, though, are teams that may not be quite as technical adept, or that may be struggling a little bit, because then it just becomes one more thing to hit a business deadline. So I think if you can get engaged early, and then whatever tools you're using to go check in on what the development teams are doing, let them know as soon as possible, and all of those walls start to drop. But I'll go back to nothing's going to substitute for getting up and going over and talking to somebody as well. So, I mean, from time to time, you got to get up and go check in with the different teams using your tools.
So a couple of things we did to make the program successful was to create a new role of a security champion within the delivery areas. Now, when I say security champion, it means he's more like a senior developer who sits within the business. And his role is basically to prevent security defects from entering the pipeline, and also to guide the developers who are working along in the same team that he's working, as what are the best ways to implement some of the security defects. So with this practice in place, we have started to see quite a decline in number of defects, and in each organization you will see there are very limited number of developers as compared to limited number of security staff as compared to developers. So the model of security assessment is not perhaps the right way to approach this problem. So that's why I think you ought to create the security champions with each of the business areas, so the business area starts to own the security. Second thing which we did so that we start speaking their languages to create the right kind of documentation, which is more like scenario-based guidelines. So in a agile project, you have various storylines, and based on each storyline, we say if you are building this kind of scenario, then these are the controls you need to implement. So with this in place, there is a huge decline in the number of defects that people are pushing into the pipeline. And there was another thing which we did was introducing a whitelist, which means that if you are developing this sort of application with this sort of features, then you don't have to come to security for any review. Basically, you can take your own call. So issue around control, because earlier security used to have a lot of control. I think security was a lot of control freak, I would say. I think security has to let go of this control freak, and we ought to have faith that developers would do something sensible, And the management has a role to play there, where when we are transferring security decisions to the delivery guys, at a certain layer, it needs to own, because if you look at it from a high-level perspective, there is not much difference between a functional defect and a security defect. At the end of the day, there are defects. As they are owning the backlog, then security defects have to be part of the backlog.
Right. So, any questions at this point from the audience before we segue into another segment around this?
My question is the current security scenario is pretty much like a reactive scenario. Like a hack happens or something happens and then we react to it. What would be your suggestions to a particular DevOps team so that they turn their executions into a proactive approach?
I think this is what I mentioned. So those three things that I talked about is all making it proactive. Because ultimately you have, before even the code review happens, you have to make sure that the code that is getting developed is correct. And the three things that I talked about, I think that's making it's much more proactive rather than reactive.
So two things that I've done which has worked well is, instead of talking to the developers or engaging with the developers head on, what you do is you talk to the people to whom developers would listen to, right? So this may seem a bit, figuring out a way around it, but one is, who are the people who they listen to? One is product managers and two is project managers or program managers, right? So instill a sense of security into the project managers as well as product managers, and then get them, make the security not as a feature of your software, but as a feature of your product, right? There is a subtle difference, but if you make it as a feature of your product, then they start coming as a requirement from the product managers, right? Instead of coming as a way from DevOps. Now, when you talk to project managers, this is where they'll play a big role is, currently, why is it a big pain for developers to think about security is because that time is typically unaccounted for in their entire thing, right? When an engineering manager talks to developer saying that, hey, why did you take such a long time to deliver a feature? He has in his mind that, for him, delivering a feature is important, nothing else, right? Now, to get developers to adapt to that is you talk to project managers and tell them, hey, we need to earmark 20%, 25% of the time for the entire duration of the software development lifecycle so that we can accommodate incorporating security features, right? Because all of them talk about security features, security fixes. Very few people talk about budgeting for that, right? So you talk to project managers, figure out a way to how to budget for fixing security issues, and then I think things will start rolling.
Sure. So the next segue that I want to get into is around threat modeling, right? Now, threat modeling obviously is I think the previous panel talked about it to a certain extent as well. But in my opinion, threat modeling is a very, very critical aspect of getting your security and DevOps program just right. And this threat modeling may be collaborative, not collaborative, who does it, what kind of threat modeling is done. I think we should learn from our panelists as to what they think is the best practice and what they have implemented within their organizations to identify risks, especially through something like threat modeling or some other practice.
Right. So threat modeling, it does a couple of things. One is it will help everyone understand what are the various kind of threats a system or a product can have. By various people, I mean various stakeholders, including business people, including product managers, everyone. Because there is not much of a technical detail in a threat model. It is very simple. I don't know how many of you have done threat modeling here. It's a very simple language where you say, okay, this is my data flow, how it's going to look like. This is my threat boundary. And then these are the system that data is going to flow through. And once you do that, you start identifying various threats in a humanly understanding language. So because one of the things that turns off a lot of security, things about security to a lot of people is there is a lot of cryptic language. I don't know how correlational that is, because you talk about XSS, you talked about SQL injection and so on and so forth. Now if you go and take this to product manager, they don't understand what it is, right? What threat modeling does is it demystifies everything. It will convert those cryptic language into humanly understandable language which everyone can understand. Now if a business person, you can go and tell him that, hey, I am storing credit card numbers in a database in a plain text format. This is a big threat. As soon as you say that, that person will understand it. You don't have to do a lot of selling. Instead you say that, hey, this is a SQL injection, I need 20 weeks to do it. Then he'll say, okay, let's, he won't say no, but he will say something like, let's prioritize it like next quarter or whatever. This is what threat modeling has done for us, and yeah.
Thank you.
There, it came back on. I guess I hit the button. Sorry. So now I lost my train of thought. For threat modeling, it'll go back to what I was saying earlier about how you have to do it more often. But at the end of the day, it's only as good as your interview skills, right? When you're trying to get this information out of a product manager, developer, et cetera. I would say just as a best practice, how do you think about how you can go use the applications that you're actually trying to secure? And I get some are front end, some are back end. That doesn't always work. But it can be something as simple as spending half a day going and using the app that you're trying to go secure. Then go have your interview and have that conversation, because not all of us get to spend time in just one area trying to learn in depth for years and years. Oftentimes we're across multiple different groups. So it's also a way to stay proactive to your proactive reactive conversation, because then when you ask a developer, they're probably trying to give you the easy answer to get by sometimes, right? Everybody's trying to cheat security out of speed because they've got people throwing demands of dollars and other things, so we've got to get out for the business. So I'd say it's got to happen. It's got to happen more often in the DevOps world. It cannot operate in this once a year, once every 3 years type model. But I'd say go a step further and go actually use the applications if you can. It'll make a lot more sense.
So I believe how you do threat modeling for a very traditional project and the way you do for a DevOps project is going to be extremely, extremely different. Because when you look at a design of a DevOps project, is that everything is code. Even your design is code, right? So that means that you don't get kind of, and even you look at Agile Manifesto, which basically talks about having working software, having more weightage over the documentation. So don't expect a lot of documentation around how the design is flowing, etc. So I think this traditional threat modeling way of doing things, I think, might not fly off in an Agile kind of project where there are multiple times delivery happening during the day. So I think there are a couple of key components I think we ought to remember is that when we're doing a threat modeling for an Agile project, which basically is a code, so that means that we need to enforce those best design principles while the development is happening, right? And as I earlier alluded about scenario-based guidelines, so basically speaking in their language that what is the best way to implement, looking at a particular kind of story or a particular kind of scenario, what are the security controls you want to implement. I think that's one way to go about it. The second way is that if, because in a very, very small story, they're not going to take architectural kind of decisions. So you have to keep those architectural decisions outside of it. And before the start of a big project, I think you ought to agree on what kind of vetted frameworks, what kind of vetted components or tools and library this project is going to use. And make sure that that's vetted by security and that's vetted by architecture so that they are using a consistent approach. Now the only issue which will come up is that if they are trying to use something which is new, and at that point of time, I think you have to vet it before and it has to happen outside of it, right? I think if you take care of these scenarios, I think you can have a pretty easy threat modeling, and also I think the chances of the defects entering the pipeline would be extremely reduced.
Right. Anything? Sure. Yes, you have a question? Yes.
About threat modeling, the question about the responsibility. In a typical organization, you will have many application architects, maybe one per application, but security architects are not going to be for every application, right? So who's going to do the threat modeling? Who owns this?
So as I said earlier, in the definition of DevOps, I'm saying you to understand very clearly that security is all about putting security in the hands of dev guys and the ops guy, right? If you don't have that mindset, if your company does not have that mindset, then your program would fail eventually. Because then you're similar to a very traditional model, you are relying on a security team to take the calls. But in a DevSecOps, you should be happily let go of your control and say, okay, these are your decisions now. Earlier, I used to take these decisions, including the risk acceptance, So let's say I take the extreme example of a critical project going into production, right? Now, what used to happen earlier was that security team used to take the call around, no, you can't move this because you have a critical defect. Ultimately, now it has to be delivery call, it has to be ops call, that yes, this defect we are putting into production. So security have to be out of it. It could be in a consultative role into this, but it can't make the call, right?
I promise I'm not hitting the button. Promise I'm not hitting the button. We've got a concept that's trust but verify. And if you're going to move at speed, you've got to trust. And you've got to let the application teams make some of those decisions. But do you have the checkpoints built in? Do you know what the data that is that you need to look at to verify that things are going the way that you need to?
Thanks.
So my questions are for the earlier topics which we have covered. So if you don't have any another topic, then I can ask probably right now. Okay. So the first question to Arun sir is for the third party. So how we can manage the latest updates for the third party, because sometimes it becomes challenging. There are a lot of updates happening. The old libraries are vulnerable and the continuous development is going on. So that question is for Arun sir.
So I think this is where I talked about having a checkpoints plays a big role or critical role. And this is something you cannot automate, right? So, so one is you have a program to, it has to be run as a program, to be honest. There is very little you can automate it as much as you would like to, right? That said, don't try to jump onto the next shiny things as early as possible, right? So even though new software has been released or new version has been released, even though it is stable, unless you absolutely need it at this point in time, don't try to jump it off, okay? That's one guideline I try to follow as far as possible. Second thing is, try to update one package at a time, and then don't combine everything and then try to make it as a mega launch, okay? That is guaranteed to fail. It has failed almost everywhere, right? So upgrade one package at a time. And then third thing is, before upgrading a package, you need to conduct a vulnerability assessment of that specific package, right? So talk to your security team, talk to the team which is conducting the security assessment. Before vetting it, getting into the production, get it vulnerability tested and then incorporate it, right? So this is something unfortunately cannot be automated, and then you have to go it one by one. So the big critical thing is, don't upgrade one package at a time, and then give time, space it out between such that even something breaks up, you have time to fix it.
I would like to bring this point here that in checkmarks, when you implement in a DevOps environment, the report you get for the open source analysis reports, we give two aspects very much. One, obviously, all the outdated libraries or all the insecure libraries that you have. Along with that, we also give the recommendation, meaning what is a stable version or what is a secure version, and our confidence level in the resolution of the problem with this new thing. So we say we have a confidence level of 100% that this is going to solve your problem, and this is 100% secure. So the point you mentioned that you need to really test it. If you trust commercial tools, one of the tasks can be minimized. And the other aspect about how do you know, meaning how to automate whether, or how to know whether you don't really need to take the thing to the DevOps pipeline itself, meaning one of our, I would say a plugin allows you what we call as a policy alerts. So let's say tomorrow there is a vulnerability that is detected in our database for one of the libraries that you are using. And if that library is being used by 10,000 customers, there will be an alert going from checkmarks saying this library file from today is become vulnerable. So you don't have to even wait for the pipeline or the scan to happen. You know it upfront.
Sure. Thank you, Ajay. Yeah, so, I mean, just to add to that question, and before we conclude, we have very little time remaining. Obviously, one of the big areas that you mentioned was software composition analysis, open source libraries and so on. There are a lot of commercial tools, obviously you have. You also have open source tools like OWASP, dependency check, that you can integrate with your Jenkins pipeline. Just to give you an analysis, you can run that and test for yourself, whatever works, makes sense. So we have very little time. I'm going to conclude quickly, and then we're going to open the floor for questions. So in conclusion, I really liked this panel. I enjoyed being a moderator on this panel. I thought we heard some great opinions. We started off with what is DevSecOps, what does DevSecOps mean to this panel, especially because they come from different backgrounds and different product engineering teams and so on and so forth. So we understood different aspects of automation, tooling, how they manage threat modeling, how they manage, application security teams and so on and so forth. So I think in conclusion, it was a great panel. Thank you for your questions. I would like to open the floor for more questions, and then we can end the session. Yes.
I'll let. Okay.
Okay, thanks. So the question is for Abhay sir. So we talked about the automation. Specifically, we talked about the continuous pipeline integration and all that. You didn't talk about something on the Selenium front. Can you spend a minute on that? Maybe just talking over that.
One of the ways that we see automation, especially, especially with Selenium and things like that, is many of the tools, commercial, open source, whatnot, they allow you to deploy functional automation as part of their testing cycle. So, for instance, OWASP Zap has a Selenium engine built in, so you can script it up, run your functional automation as opposed to spidering. And you can run a lot of these tests. You can also run Selenium for security regression. So let's say you found an exploit, non-easily automatable exploit like insecure direct object reference. You can always use Selenium to run security regressions on something like that. So yeah, this is, we can obviously discuss offline.
Any other questions? All right. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks. There is?
So my question is from all of you guys. Like in AppSec with DevOps, the AppSec team and the DevOps teams are working in collaborative environment, right? But in some scenario where the DevOps team or organization is hiring or outsourcing the security guys or pen testers for such a security assessment. So in that case, those AppSec team doesn't know about the various scenario you told about, the specific scenario we need to test on the application. So suppose the service-based companies doing work with the lots of other companies for securing their applications code, right? So in that case, is there any available benchmark or guidelines what specific scenarios need to be tested, like mostly in the e-commerce platform applications?
Thank you. The question was obviously, around, he was talking about AppSec and DevOps teams and outsourcing possibilities and the kind of scenarios you should test for a particular type of product. Am I right?
Yes.
I think if you're outsourcing, though I'm not a great fan of outsourcing security operations, to be honest with you, because that's like that's extremely critical, you know. So I think I would never outsource. But I think if you're outsourcing, then the question is more around how you vetted the vendor, that he's having a great coverage, he's doing the right coverage, he's doing the right things. I think you have to go to those aspects of the things and see, you know, if he's the right sort of expertise. Because because I think in security there are no test cases, you know, because I think depending on the kind of screen or interfaces you are, I think any pen tester would apply his own mind and logic. Otherwise, it could have been pretty easy, right? Otherwise, it could have been automated also. So I think it more goes back to the vendor vetting program as how you have assessed that vendor so that you outsource your security program to it.
Any other viewpoints? Yeah, one more point to add to your thing is probably, I think the effectiveness of the threat model can be used as a basis for testing. So if you do threat modeling effectively, those scenarios can be used for testing as well. So I would say that is another. Yeah.
I think another thing that you can use is don't outsource fully the whole program, outsource a part of it, and the other part which you don't outsource, use it to see whether that person has missed a part of it, right? Because if you outsource fully, you won't know, right? And another is don't outsource it to one vendor, but next year change the vendor and see if the second vendor comes out with something different.
So I think the absolute bare minimum someone should do is do a threat model, right? Because it doesn't take, it's not a specialized knowledge or something. It's as good as or as simple as designing your architectural system. So there are two things. With threat model, you will come to know that these are my security risk assessments. Then you can take a call. You can figure out a way to mitigate it. Don't do it. Do whatever. If you don't do it, threat model also, then you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's a bigger challenge.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. There was a wonderful panel discussion. Thanks a lot for all the panelists.